Hello, and welcome to another edition of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. There's enough noise going on in the world right now that we don't need yet another distraction, yet another useless conversation. So it is my pledge to my audience that I'm going to bring you interesting conversations with interesting people who are doing interesting things. And today's guest is definitely one of those. Dan Pontefract is the founder and the CEO of the Pontefract Group, a firm that improves the state of leadership and organizational culture. He's the best-selling author of not one, not two, not three, but 4 books. His new one, Lead, Care, Win, and then Open to Think, The Purpose Effect, and Flat Army. He's a renowned speaker. He and I know each other through the speaking world. He's presented, again, not one, not two, not three, but 4 different TED events, and also writes for Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and other such great business publications. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Victoria at the Gustafson School of Business and has garnered more than 20 industry awards throughout his career. Before writing, before academia, he was the Chief Vision Officer and Chief Learning Officer at TELUS, which is a Canadian telecommunications company with $14 billion in revenue and 50,000 global employees. He launched the Transformation Office, TELUS MBA, and TELUS Leadership Philosophy. All of these award-winning initiatives that dramatically helped increase the company's employment engagement to record levels of near 90%. Now, this is an interesting number, Dan, because we know, at least in the United States, that only 1/3 of employees consider themselves engaged at any given time. And like you, I spent a lot of time, at least before COVID, on airplanes. And I used to get on stage and I would talk about this number and I would implore my audiences to think about this idea that 2/3 of their audience, of their staff, are not engaged at the moment. And I would get on an airplane to head out there, and I get on an airplane to head home, and I would get on planes and I look to the left and I look at the pilots and I think to myself, shoot, I sure hope they're part of the third that's engaged. So how do you get employees to go from only a third engagement to 90% engagement?
Well, first of all, Laura, LGO, let's go, LGO. Thank you for the invite. It's so great to see you. So great to be here. And I hope you're safe. Well, I know you're safe, but power to you and your family out there in Boston. So we've got 6 hours to dissect that question, essentially, right? The audience will disappear. Yeah.
Everyone listening live now is like, oh, wait a minute. I better cancel my lunch.
The fact of the matter is that it's not Dan. I mean, that would be a horribly pretentious thing to suggest that, Dan was responsible for that. There was a cadre of people. When I got to TELUS in 2008 with a sort of engagement score of just about 50, I think it was 51% at the time, it was pretty apparent, why I was brought in was to sort of help, resurrect what engagement means. But there were another 50% of the organization that were engaged, including lots of leaders. So that's kind of the story. It may have taken 5 years to get upwards of 90% engagement, and it did take 5 years. But don't forget, there are always in every organization a host of people who are awesome, who go above and beyond the call of duty, who only want to see the best of themselves and others that are in the organization. So the easiest, quickest, simplest tip for anyone that's in an organization like that or doing consulting work, tap into those peeps, find your people, if you will, and say, look, we can do this. Let's do this. And so effectively what happened was the first year or so was a look, listen, and learn tour, finding, my peeps. And then, ultimately with lots of folks, including the C-suite, saying, we've got to fix this. How are we going to fix it? And so then we can sort of proverbially peel the onion back a few ways. One is learning. You and I are big learning fans. At that time, the organization said, all right, you go to learning, like you go to a classroom to learn. Now, seems kind of nuts now, 12 years later, that we learn everywhere, especially in a pandemic, we're learning online a lot. But when an entire organization of 50,000 odd people think that they're expecting their boss to send them to a 1-week course, and that wasn't happening, and then all of a sudden they said, I didn't get my training this year. This place sucks. Well, you can see how that spills down to everyone in the coffee rooms and the cafe chats and the lunch rooms and the hallways. So learning was a big thing. How do we switch from training is an event to
Mm.
learning as a lifelong curiosity? And how do you do that in various ways? Now, then we quickly went to leadership. So leadership was very hierarchical, very white ivory tower, very command and control. And so if learning could be thought of as equal parts formal, you do need classroom and online learning and so forth, but you can have lots of informal and social learning like this.
Mhm.
Hopefully we learn from each other. Hopefully the audience learns from you, maybe a little bit from me, ideally. But there's lots of informal and social ways to lead. So, Nilofer Merchant is great with the let's go for a walk and talk it out.
Mhm.
So walk and talk meetings as opposed to formal in your office with a big desk in between you. And it seems so ridiculously antiquated. But things like recognition inside of your leadership strategy. How do people recognize one another? How do leaders recognize their people? Is it just because you survived 10 years and made it to the 10-year anniversary that you get a pin or a tree planted for you? That's recognition. Or again, kind of like to the model, are there social and informal ways to take someone for a lunch or a thank you card? Holding the door and saying, I hope you have a nice day is a form of recognition. So we can go on for hours, but it's little pieces like that between the learning model, the leadership model, recognition, how is performance development happening? How do we treat one another? It just, it's an endless onion, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I made every one of these mistakes when I ran my last company. I'm pretty certain because, I always thought that, the way that you manage well is like you reward the good behavior, you punish the bad behavior. And honestly, it wasn't until I had kids, and frankly, it wasn't until I had a puppy that I was like, oh, if you just reward the good behavior, right? If you like, as Alan Mulally says, the former CEO of Ford and Boeing, if you love them up. Right. If you love them
Yeah.
up, you can be teaching them all the time what the right behavior should be. And the idea that learning is year round and it's not a thing that you do once, like you send somebody somewhere for like a week and then you expect them to come back and you expect that that's going to carry through the other 51 weeks of the year in moments of crises.
Mhm.
As we talk about it now, of course, it seems ridiculous, but there's billion-dollar industry that's based around the idea of like conferences and training and all these things that happen like as a one shot, like a almost like a booster shot of a vaccination.
Yeah, like I refer to as spray and pray.
Mm.
So what happens is the leader ultimately says, "Oh, I better send my team or an individual out to customer service training,
Hmm.
or project management training, or whatever, right?" And then they take the 2 or 3 day course. It's sprayed at them with a fire hose, and you just literally are praying and hoping that whatever was learned inside of that course is reinforced into their day, their habits. But leadership means is a daily action. That's what leadership is. And so
Mm.
as a leader, sure, send them to the course, but find out what the course is about, and then have conversations and ways in which that you can take those behaviors to inculcate the behaviors into their day to day. I'll give you an example. So call centers, huge part of many organizations, right? Whether you're medium size or large, obviously. So if call centers are, thinking of a new way in which to handle customer complaints, let's say, imagine if you just sent them to the new customer complaint training that was 2 days, let's call it. And then you just hope for the best that they took everything in those 12 or 14 hours or so. And then on Wednesday, when they've come back from it, now they're all of a sudden magically addressing customer complaints in a different way. Or do they need the nurturing, the coaching, the reinforcement, the systems, the recognition, that the leader should be there as a guide on the side, Sherpa, to helping those new behaviors be woven into their next call, into future calls. It doesn't happen magically. That's the whole point of leadership. You're there to lead, to coach, to inspire, to motivate, and to remedy as necessary.
I think, I did a fascinating podcast a couple weeks ago with Safi Bakal, who wrote Loon Shots. I'm sure
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
him. And his argument is actually that structure is the thing that allows innovation to happen, not focusing on this idea of culture that we talk about all the time. But as we dug into it, the idea that that leaders become leaders as they have been there longer and they have more of the perks of rank, and so they want to stay, they want to protect themselves, they want to protect what they've built underneath them. And I think it's sort of where it comes together, I think, is that most leaders don't actually know how to lead. I mean, I know when I became an accidental CEO of a company that I found excited, a moment of rage when I was working at a bigger company. I know that I walked in having no idea how to do it, and no idea what to do. And there's almost like human carnage that the mistakes that you make along the way.
Right.
What's the, like, if somebody is new to leadership and they sort of find themselves in this position, all of a sudden they're looking around, they're like, oh no. And also it's kind of lonely up here at the top. What are the best ways to figure out who you are as a leader? I know you talk about how making leadership matter. How do you figure out who, like, your own personal leadership voice? Where do you find that?
Well, some of the things that I've done in the past, both personally and then working with these, executives, whether directors, VPs, EVPs, whatever. There's a few things. First is, I've often advocated and have asked the team I've now inherited or now I'm leading or what have you, what's their preferred leadership style?
Hmm.
So when the first thing you do is not to say, I'm the leader and here's how things are going to be, it's, hey, what's your preferred style? And whether you do that one-on-one and or with, a team session itself, what you're doing is, first of all, you're opening up vulnerability. And when you're vulnerable, saying, I may not know necessarily what you need or want, so I'm going to ask a question of what you need and want in a leader. You're now then saying, it's actually about us, not necessarily me. Yes, we all know the buck stops here. Yes, we know I've got to make tough decisions. We know I've got probably a salary that's higher than yours and a title that might be fancier. But we don't have to throw it out and say, look at me, I'm awesome. Who are you? So when you just ultimately are asking them right away, what do you prefer? What you're also getting then is data. You're getting ammunition, if you will, for what do these folks need when the rubber has to hit the road, when it's time to call in well, we got to really think about what we're doing here, folks. Or when a crisis emerges, customer complaints, pandemic, whatever might come up. So when that's really key for me, because you can weave that into perhaps what you don't know are some of your blind spots. So for example, Laura, when someone says, I prefer my one-on-ones to be short and more frequent. Well, you're a leader that might have been used to 60-minute, once every month one-on-ones. And you had no idea that someone on your team prefers 15-minute one-on-ones once a week. And so just little bits like that, you're like, oh, so you need quicker, shorter touch points. I never thought of that.
But what do you do when you're looking at one of your staff members and you're like, yeah, they think they know what they need, but they don't?
Well, I mean, again, that's back to being a leader. You're obviously, I hope, in that role because you have matured, you've got the experience behind you, and someone's promoted you or hired you into a role because of what you've done prior to. So there are times, undoubtedly, age or otherwise, where a leader has to step in and say, you know what? Here's what I'm seeing. What do you think about that? Is there ways in which we might be able to bridge the gap? The key part about leadership is being open, and being kind in the feedback that is directed to an individual team member or team. What I see in those deleterious, disengaged organizations and teams, the 70-odd% that you're referring to earlier, it's far more often than not, it is about leaders and or senior leaders or the culture in the organization that is one that's dogmatic and hierarchical and basically unkind. Like when there's no empathy in leadership, when we're trying to deliver, bad news or constructive criticism or ways in which to, do your job processes, whatever, better. When we're not kind and empathic in that sense, we tend to lose the humanity of the situation. Thus, then we lose the employee whom becomes disengaged or disenfranchised even. So I find that when those tough, opportunities do arise, the more we're kinder, gentler, calmer, if you will, and empathic, the greater chance that the message is heard, the behavior may be remedied, and you're not losing them to the disengagement side of the Gallup or Aon Hewitt or any one of those engagement polling firms.
How do you balance diversity, right, in all the ways that we define it? People want to be talked to in different ways. They want to be coached in different ways. They want to be led in different ways. They want to get feedback in different ways with not sort of twisting yourself into a pretzel where you're trying to manage, if you have 10 reports, you're managing 10 people in 10 different ways. Diversity is really good for organizations and innovation and creativity. And also doesn't allow you as a leader to really like groove the pattern of how you lead well. Like what's the advice on balancing diversity and that sort of taking it all on your shoulders as the leader?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're in the leadership role, and the key thing to remember here is one size will not fit all, Laura. And so suck it up, buttercup, as I sort of I say to my teenagers as well, right? The same message applies when I'm working with C-suites or directors and above. You have to recognize that on your team, whether it's 10, let's say in your example, there are going to be 10 potentially different ways in which they want to be recognized, how they want to be coached, how they want to have their meetings. And I get that it may seem frustrating, like, Dan, why are you actually, it's my way or the highway, isn't it? Well, that's the actual problem. That's why we have 70% disengagement. When the leader isn't open, vulnerable, and able to copacetically say, maybe I could fine tuning my style for you. That's individual, right? Now there's still what I call team norms. So let's unpack that one for a second. There's individual nuances, right, on the one-on-ones or, just dealing with, let's say, you're my boss. I have certain ways in which I'd like to be treated by you, let's say, okay? But we're part of a team. So you have a team, Laura, you're the boss, and I'm one of the other 10 here. If we create sessions once a quarter or even like twice a year and call them team norms, where for 60 to 120 minutes, the team is together with the leader, debating, deliberating, deciphering, deciding how the work is going to be done, not what work is going to be done. And it doesn't even matter what the objectives are. It's just the how. That talks about business processes. That talks about communication processes. That talks about collaboration processes. You're actually, as a team now of 11, deciding what is the more efficient, effective way. Let's not forget that employees don't want to go to work doing a bad job. Okay, there's the 1 or 2% that are morons, right? So let's cut the chafe there and say most folks go to work wherever work is and say, hey, I want to bring my best self to work. Now, if we're having team norm conversations, then you have a pool, in our case, of 11 people saying, how do we want to be treated? How do we want to operate as a team? And then maybe some things change from quarter to year to whatever. So that's why we have it again. So example. If we were having a team norm meeting in January of this year saying, okay, the year is 2020, hindsight being everything, we're going to have an amazing year. And we had no idea what 2020 would unfold to be. We probably somewhere around mid to late March are going to want to have another team norm meeting because panic ensues because of the pandemic and things are going to have to change for us as a team. So now, Laura, would it be best prudent for a leader to get on, StreamYard or Zoom or WebEx and say, this is how we're going to meet going forward? Or in a new team norm session, are we going to work as an operating unit and suggest to each other, what are ways that we could now collaborate, communicate, et cetera? Are we going to all text? Are we texting at 8 o'clock at night now? Is that cool? When's my mental health breaks? When do I allow myself to re-energize and resurge my own soul, et cetera? That's, again, when leaders are dictating the way in which it has to be, they're missing the point. If we're open and asking and then having to make tough decisions about how we'll act and decide on how we might operate in this particular example we're talking about, that's far better for an engagement strategy. Back to where we were 20 minutes ago when we started the whole point about engagement.
Is it bad to say that I think that COVID is a phenomenal leadership opportunity for people? I mean, it's just this great moment for leaders to show what they stand for, what they believe in, to show some vulnerability, to have a "we're all in this together" moment. I mean, I do not want to in any way minimize the pain and the suffering that people have gone through with COVID. But if you are a leader, this is your chance to really shine, right?
And I love the word shine, because metaphorically, clearly, the pandemic is the largest of shadows that we've ever had to face as a generation. When I say generation,
Yes.
I mean the five of us that are alive today. So if we, however, take sadly the opportunity of that shadow and step outside of it, we shine. We see the light, and therefore we can shine and look at things differently. So, we could probably, you and I talk ad infinitum about the innovation and creativity and ideas that could generate just from being in a pandemic. But let's focus on leadership. You're spot on, as we say in England. When that leader takes the opportunity to self-assess, how was I doing things pre-pandemic? Why is my engagement score still 38%? Wonder if it's me. And yes, maybe there's, obviously relations to how the company culture is and whatever, but let's just focus on the leader for a second. What an opportunity. What an opportunity to say, folks, I think we need, and by the way, as a sidebar, I hate the whole new normal terminology.
Oh, I reject the term new normal. I didn't like the old normal. So why would you
Exactly.
why would you just accept the new normal? That's
Yeah.
craziness.
So I think you and I are kindred spirits from long ago, and that's exactly what I've been saying. So this is back to the leader point. If they think that their old normal was normal, they're fatigued and disillusioned for sure. It's a chance for the great reset. It's a chance for them to reset their leadership, to be more inclusive and empathic. I mean, we still need clarity as a leader. We still need, vision, but that can also be formed by questions and answers and discussion, right? We still need to get stuff done. There are still budget meetings. There's still customer issues, right? Like, things go awry when we're testing in beta on a product or whatever. Like, come on. Like, I'm not naive. But I also know that what works, whether my experience at TELUS, at SAP, or working as a consultant with few orgs around this world, that when you do step back and wonder, and again, back to the pandemic being an opportunity for you to do so, am I humane? Am I human? Am I kind? Am I open? Do I make mistakes and admit to them? Do I ask for help? Am I the smartest person in the room? And if so, am I agreeing that I'm in the wrong room? That I need smarter people around me? Like, there's just all these key questions I think we could ask ourselves, going for those Nilofer Mershon walks, perhaps with ourselves, and just getting out and saying, how am I as a leader?
Yeah, I love the idea of those walks. I learned as a parent of teenage boys that my best parenting time comes when I drive them home from school. Not when I drive them to school, because everybody's stressed and I gotta get to work and they gotta get to school and but so I don't do that. But in the middle of the day, I go and I pick my kids up from school. My husband's always like, "Laura, that is so inefficient. Why don't you just hire a babysitter or hire somebody to do that?" I was like, first of all, that's a lot of money. Like, have somebody wait around all day to
Right.
drive kids home for 15 minutes. But second of all, those are those moments when they're tired, when they're emotional, when they're hungry, when everything just comes right out. But you're not looking at each other face to face. You don't have the desk in between you. You don't have the kitchen counter, whatever it is in between you. And there's no confrontation, right? This idea of like when you're staring at somebody and you're watching where their eyes on, what their body language is. But I call it windshield time. Like, windshield time is my
Nice.
best parenting time of all. And I mentioned earlier that being a parent made me a better manager. It also made me better at managing my clients, frankly. But figuring out ways to create windshield time with my staff really took a lot of the oxygen out of the fire I felt when there were issues that were going on. But the thing about the pandemic is that suddenly we're actually seeing each other in our natural habitats, right? We're like able to see each other in our living rooms. And when you see the big basket of dirty laundry behind me, it may make you feel better about the big basket of dirty laundry behind you. And suddenly we're human, right? And so to bring humanity into leadership where it's no longer existing within the confines of the 9 to 5 job seems to me like it seems to me almost like a Rubicon that we can't cross back into, because being fake, being just like quote unquote professional, and just sort of being closed will I think will feel really strange after this sort of all in it together moment that we're in.
I'm a hugger on hiatus, and I really need to get back into an office, anyone's office, I don't care who. I've always been sort of that individual, much to your point. I love the windshield metaphor, by the way. That, the health and wellness and engagement of a team is far more important than what it is that you're making or servicing or creating, because that's almost an output, right, of the culture of the team, of the camaraderie. And when that team is flying high, it doesn't matter what widget you're making, because when they're flying high, you could switch gears and all of a sudden be dropped into the middle of a foreign country, and they'll figure it out because they've got each other's backs. You've got theirs. There's this trust. They're in sync, if you will, in simpatico, and it works. So I gave you an example. So we would identify these as tiger teams, and in TELUS. And so a tiger team, because they were so high performing and high functioning, you sort of take a look at them and say, okay, you're Navy SEALs. All right, you're going over here and you're going to tackle this problem for 6 to 12 months. And again, not every team can be high performing or high functioning like that. But when you see it operating in a way as such, that's what I aspire to, because there's just a gel, but there's a looking out for one another. And that's what I would argue families are supposed to do. The high functioning families, of course, right? When they look out for one another, there's a kindred spirit. There's a sixth sense that they get where the other person is when they're down or up, and they kind of somehow collegially figure it all out.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned families. We do a family meeting in our house every weekend where we like sit down, and in the beginning of the meeting, we talk about a value, like something that we care about as a family that we've exhibited in some way, we've manifested in some way that week. And then we do an airing of gratitudes where we go around and we recognize each other. Hey, shout out to you for like doing a workout this week, or shout out to you for, texting everyone that you're at, 7-Eleven. Does anyone want ice cream? Like whatever the thing is. Then there's this sort of logistics, who's where and what and doing what week, who needs to get picked up, what are we having for dinner? And then we do an airing of grievances. That's where shit gets real, right? That's where we sort of talk about like when the iron's cold, things that happen. And then we schedule the next meeting, and it's 45 minutes. We're in, we're out, we're done. And we started doing it because my kids' camp used to do it. They would have tent meetings, and they would talk about what kind of culture do they want to have in the tent, and who are they when they're at their very best, and how do they want to show up for each other when they're at their very worst. And doing those meetings, I wish I was still running my company when we started doing those meetings, because I would have run the meetings in my company completely differently. Now, the way I ran meetings in my company is you go and you're like, what's the business at hand? And you race right past the human and the recognition and the sort of being there together and getting everyone on the same page. Like, it took me so long to realize that we were talking about how do we drive towards goals before I really had agreement on everybody knowing that that's the shared goal. And I think being able to sort of step back and take that moment and have the windshield time and have the conversation and be more human and really talk about where we all are meeting each other in that place makes such a huge difference. And you would never run your business without having regular meetings. So why would you run your family without having regular meetings? But how I did one and the other, they could impact each other.
Well, first of all, I don't know why we've never talked about this, but that's our Sunday nights.
Oh, fantastic. Amazing.
It has been for, I don't know, like 14 years now, maybe 13. Yeah. So our goats, as we affectionately call them, are 17, 15, and 13. And we decided early on, Denise and I, that Sunday nights would be that exact point where we have, we call kudos. We have brickbats, which is what didn't I like about someone, or something.
Grievances, yeah.
Yeah, the grievances, essentially. It's like a union meeting.
Yes.
That's hilarious. Wow, I thought that was so cool. Thank you.
Yeah, It is kind of amazing though, right? Like taking those moments and striking while the iron's cold makes a huge difference. You can actually have a conversation about the brickbat versus it being this like conflagration that then brews into something more, which, when you have teenagers in your house is like, it's a lot of Sturm and Drang.
Well, and so in the work world, and it's a derogatory term, so bear with me if anyone's religious. I didn't make it up, but it's what it was called often in organizations. It's called the come to Jesus meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when the leader and the team need third-party help because it's become so fractured, and they
Yes.
haven't had those caring, enduring, open, honest, truthful conversations, whether they are team norms or like our Sunday night metaphor example here with the families. If you're not tending to the culture of your team, you're going to end up either imploding and or needing third-party assistance to repair. And then the next layer up, that next group or the HR team, people in culture come in and say, okay, this is costing us, customers, or this is costing us innovation time or whatever, right? Productivity. So this is a nightmare. So then it starts becoming real about, so we start whacking people. And so if you think that this doesn't have a consequence, your attitude, your behavior, the way you treat people, ultimately, then think about getting a reference for the next job you need from the people that saw you operate this way.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you first get interested in leadership?
It's a really horrifically sad story, and it pains me every time I try to tell it. So if I tear up, bear with me.
Okay.
I'm a soft Canadian. When I was,
you wouldn't be the first person who cried on the show, by the way. You would actually be the third at this point. I've only done a couple months of these, so
Okay, so
bring it.
So when I was a kid, and I say kid, I was mid-teens. Because I come from British blood, emigrated to Canada. I was really wee with my parents. I guess I supposedly had some soccer skill, football skill, as we say. And so growing up outside of Toronto, I played for the Ontario team, the province of Ontario, and I was in the national team camp for selection for the under-17 World Cup of soccer. Now, the only reason Canada was in the under-17 World Cup of soccer, as you can imagine, is because we were hosting it, and host countries are allowed in. So it's a totally different story. Now, at one of the final camps, they've got the 30-odd boys at camp, and it's selection time, Laura. And so we're all in this sort of auditorium in the seats, and the management team comes up on stage, and they got a clipboard, they go to the microphone, and they call out each name. Paul Pesci-Solido. They come up, they shake the photo, or they go off into another room to get carded. So now they're officially on the squad. Now, the 18th name was called, and it wasn't mine. So I'm left in the audience with 12-ish boys. Again, we're 15, 16, depending on your age. And the director, the manager of the squad, comes back to the microphone and looks at us a little bit like quizzical and says, better luck next time, boys, and walks off the stage. Now, at the time, it was at a camp in the University of Guelph, which is about an hour and a bit outside of Toronto. And my parents and I and my family, my sister and my brother, had a cottage 3 hours north of there on Lake Huron. And so I decided to walk. That's by car. I decided to walk to the cottage because I was so distraught, not being cut. I've been cut before, it happens, but by how we were treated. I saw all these boys just sob, and I saw this man ruin the psyche of these boys. And I'm not sure if anyone ever played soccer after that again. And it was
callous.
Callous is the best word to describe it, Laura. And I made a commitment to myself then and there, which is still visceral, that A, I would never treat anyone that way. And B, if I have a chance in my life to help others, I'm going to. And so I committed myself to actually being a doctor. And so I went into, almost made it to med school because I said I don't like blood. So I switched at McGill University to become a teacher. I thought, well, wait a second. Maybe I can help people become better versions of themselves if I become a teacher. So I was a teacher in high school for 3 years, met Denise at McGill, moved to Vancouver, taught high school. And then I realized, well, okay, I kind of like kids, but maybe my purpose is more about adults and helping them become better versions of themselves. So fandangled a way to convince the dean of computing at the Institute of Technology that they should hire me as a 25-year-old to run their downtown campus that had just opened, that was empty. And so for about 5 years, I was the director of this downtown campus helping career changers. And I learned there the unique traits of how, and again, we're talking 1998 through 02-ish, around there. So .com and et cetera, like how technology and people could go together if we thought about people first to then bring the technology to others. So it was wonderful training ground for my leadership skill to lead as a young buck, quite frankly, but also to kind of figure things out of how technology can play a part in our lifestyles. Then in 2002, high tech started phoning, I guess, and said, hey, why don't you come work for us? So Adobe and others, et cetera. So I ended up at a company that was called Crystal Decisions. They made reporting software, 3,000 people, and they wanted me to be their global head of worldwide development of people. And I thought, global and worldwide in the same title, I'm in. This is great. I like redundancy and irony. So I was the global head of worldwide development. And Crystal Decisions became Business Objects, became SAP, big high-tech companies. They kept buying each other. And so I went through 11 acquisitions and was in charge of culture and training people and customers. And it was like, I'm in my element. But what I realized I really wanted to do was, this was high-performing organizations to begin with. And I felt I wasn't learning enough. And so after the SAP stint, I joined the AT&T of Canada, in essence, TELUS. And it had that rather anemic engagement score. And for 10 years, working as its chief learning officer and the so-called chief envisioner, which is another story for another day, helped the organization do all kinds of great things. So when I joined TELUS, I left a team of about 150 people, and again, all the good things I was doing with SAP, to join an organization that I felt I had a chance to reshape how an entire organization might change its culture. And it was a blast. I'm indebted to Ken Takagaki, a dean who hired me at BCIT, to Wendy Van Donkeler, who hired me at Crystal Decisions, and to Josh Blair and Andrew Turner, who hired me at TELUS. So people in my life who helped me become a better person of who I was, to then, I think, just absorb and sponge up all of the good stuff I've learned from other people, to then write about it, speak about it, and hopefully help others.
It's been an incredible career, but I want to go back to that walk. I want to go back to that walk before we talk about some of the other things in the career. So you said it was 3 hours by car, and you decided to walk. That's
Yeah.
is that days? How long did that
Well,
take you?
so
Or did your
old,
parents at some point come
yeah,
by and pick you up? Yeah. Were you on the side of the road sobbing? What was
old Highway 6, still there, between essentially Guelph, the city, and up there in Sauble Beach. I was about 90 minutes on the road with my duffel bag and my backpack and my slides on, and my dad with the old station wagon with the fake wood paneling on the sides. Somehow, and again, there's no cell phones or mobile phones at the time, right? There's no GPS to track me. They're like, yeah, I guess he left. We don't know. It's because he was at the university looking for me. So I knew where I was going, but no one else knew where I was headed. And probably about 90 minutes in, roughly speaking, there, the station wagon with the wood paneling shows up on the side of the road. And, my dad, I saw him and I was sobbing, obviously. And he just held me and he said, don't worry, you're better than that. And that's all he said. And then we sort of took the car ride up to the beach and to the cottage. And, the rest of my family met in the other car later on that day.
Are there traits from your parents, from teachers, from coaches that you saw because it's not like you had to have some view of the way people should be treated to know that the way that this guy treated everyone in that room wasn't right.
Yeah, I think we're all infected and impacted by stories of our parents and the general family. One in particular really gnawed at me, and still to this day does. My dad's still with me, love him to bits. He's back in England, but his father I never got a chance to meet. He passed away when my dad was, I guess, 20, just about 2 years before I was born, and. And my dad's granddad, was mayor of the town in northwestern England, in Blackburn. And my dad shares this story where, as a young boy, through to the point in which he got his apprenticeship in engineering, which is 16 back at the time in England. So, young boy, sort of 6 to 16, when they went for walks, back to your point of loving your walks. His dad wouldn't let him walk beside him. He had to walk, 3 meters behind him. And it was a class thing. The mayor and his wife, my grandmom, would walk together, and the children had to walk 3 to 6 meters behind. And I kept always would like, Dad, why? Because when my dad and I grew up having walks, we would be side by side, and he would always hold my hand. And big pause, right? I thought, I didn't know any different until probably I was 12 or 13. He told me the story. And it still gnaws at me that he was so impacted that he didn't want his children or to be, affected by anyone else, thinking that there is a class structure in a family, which there was in his. And, he said he had a good relationship with his dad, but it was very almost transactional and perfunctory, as opposed to, loving and transformational. And I certainly, learn from that. And with our goats and Denise, I hope I'm certainly not like that. But I thought that could transfer over into the workplace as well. I mean, I've been known to, and I've written about crying at work. And I think being emotional is okay. Oh God, being emotional is okay. See, oh my God, what's so funny? We were just talking about it. That's my dad on FaceTime.
If only I knew how to bring him into this conversation. That would be amazing. That's incredible that your dad, you say his name. There he is.
I can't wait to tell him. I feel embarrassed. I did turn off my phone, but now it's a sign.
That's amazing. So, all right. So you have this. You're growing up in this place where people show love and they show affection and they are kind to each other, and then you see this.
Well, not necessarily. Hold on. So I haven't finished the other half of the story. I had and grew up with a very alcoholic mother.
Oh, okay.
And so, we're going the other way now. So I'm not meaning this to be a psychology couch or counseling course, right? But to suffice to say that there were rough times in my upbringing because of Mom.
Yeah.
And, my parents ended up, when I went to university, finally separating ways because of that, pressure and angst and just a refusal to get help. But we suffered through that as my sister, my brother, and my dad. And again, so there's my dad's story about his dad, my dad's love, really for me. My mom loved me, but it was difficult, right? And so again, I don't ever want to bring that, not the alcohol, but the burden of those types of relationships and the conversation that ensued. I never want to have happened with other relationships, be them with you and I in a personal one or a professional one in the workplace. Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense then, why a lot of what you write about is sort of bringing that love and bringing the vulnerability and sort of being who you are, because it's certainly there's impact here. I'm just so struck that at the age of 16 years old, you had the presence to know that what that man did was basically borderline abusive. I mean, but now it makes sense because you grew up in a home where you had such striking contrast between the sort of love and how people were able to or not able to express it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's well said. It underscores the point that I have a declaration of purpose, which I wasn't really calling it that until when I wrote a book about purpose, but it was like my mission statement, my personal reason to be, and that came in between the SAP role and the TELUS role. And so, to be transparent, I left SAP because it had just gotten to be enough, essentially. And so when I left SAP, I took sort of a 6-month holiday. And we'd financially figure out how to do that. Denise was so kind. We went to Europe for a bit. It was great, and we had 3 kids, 5, 3, and 1 at the time. Pretty
Wow.
nuts. But I was in Vancouver climbing up something called Grouse Mountain, which is essentially 1.8 kilometers or about a mile and a bit up a vertical incline. And I had gotten basically it's tough. It's a tough climb. And I got it down to about 42 minutes. And I was doing this daily, in essence, to sort of better my time and whatever. You do it as well with your running, et cetera, right? So I kept playing around with these words. So if I'm going to switch, and I had made a decision to go to TELUS, we just decided that I would start later on in the year, so I needed a bit of a break. So the declaration of purpose is this: we're not here to see through each other. We're here to see each other through. And when I finally jumbled those words together, and I called it my mission statement at the time, I entered TELUS. And I used that as a way in which to introduce myself to the team, but to hopefully get other leaders thinking, hey, why are we here? Are we here for the name on the back of the jersey, or perhaps the crest on the front? The team, TELUS, customers, whatever. And so that's when I started writing and being public and speaking, right in 2008, when I joined TELUS, to do it completely differently than what I was doing with SAP or the Institute of Technology or anything else in my life.
Yeah, I love that. We're not here to see through each other. We're here to see each other through. It's so beautifully put. And we don't have to get into politics here, but I was struck watching the debates earlier in the week where there is this conversation about are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And that was the line that Ronald Reagan delivered at the first debate against Jimmy Carter in 1980, and then won in a landslide. Jimmy Carter didn't win re-election. Ronald Reagan won re-election. And it was, are you better off? Are you, do you have more money in your pocket? Is it easier to go get, stuff at the stores? Do you feel safer? All of this stuff. And I was struck by the fact that line, which was such a great, nail in the coffin line, as a former political hack, I loved it. The real question is, are we better off? Right? Are we all better off now? And the way that you put it about whether it's the name on the back of the jersey or the crest on the front, I think is something that when you're sitting there worrying about, am I going to get this? Am I going to get this report done? Am I going to land this client? Am I going to do this, that, or the other to hit that nut that I'm being told that I have to hit? We forget about the crest on the front, and it's all about the name on the back.
It's existential in essence, right? It's sort of, a little bit hero's journey esque. And again, if we want to talk purpose and meaning, it's also paying homage a little bit to stakeholder capitalism versus, profit at all costs capitalism.
Yes.
Who do we serve? Hopefully, and I know you well enough to know that it is not just ourselves. It is the community. It's the environment. It's the planet. It's people. It's employees. It's suppliers, partners. It's competitors. Right? It's the cycle. It's not just profit. Profit's important, but it's an outcome of that culture and serving that sort of higher purpose, in my opinion, as I've seen it in the places in which I've been fortunate to work with and for. If we do talk politics, and I'd love to, being a Canadian, I've always loved the Robin Williams line when he used to shoot a lot of movies in Vancouver where I'm in. The best line was, "Hey, so Robin, what do you think of Canada? Oh, Canada, nicest people ever. Living in the attic on top of a crack party."
I mean, I that is so true right now.
Now, I love you. I love, there's so many American friends, so don't get me wrong. I just thought it was a cute point. And and by the way, I also love really smart people like you who have figured out that Jimmy Carter could indeed run again for a second term at 96. I think he'd be a great president, by the way, again.
Yeah.
we our hearts go out to you. To be dead honest, there was a poll done by Ipsos here in Canada, one of the polling firms, and they looked at 3,000 Canadians right across every of the 10 provinces, different ages brackets, all 3 generations or 4 generations, sorry. And they they found that 86% of us en masse would vote for your Democratic candidate. And that is not to say that Canada is a socialist country. That's not to say Canada is a democratic country. I think what we're en masse saying is that, you know, our hearts go out to you for that genuine lack of empathy that seems to be hurtling towards one another in a way that's not just visceral and partisan, but inhumane.
Inhumane. And, you know, for me, for you, like, we studied leadership. So for me, like, you know, I am, you know, people who listen to this, they know I dropped out of law school to join Bill Clinton's campaign because I heard him talking about this idea that there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with America. And it was all about service to others and for others and changing yourself while you're changing the community. And so I'm all about that, but I'm also a political hack, right? So like the theater of all of it, I find fascinating. For me, it comes down to a question of somebody, regardless of whether or not I believe in their policy stances, whether they're worthy of the office. So, you know, I mentioned Ronald Reagan earlier. I didn't agree with a single policy stance of Ronald Reagan's, but he never took his suit jacket off in the Oval Office. Such was his reverence for the history of what went down there. And so it is the erosion of public service, of trust in government, of leadership, of all of that. That's what makes me crazier than anything else. I mean, the man's been sick for what, 4 or 5 days now, and he has not mentioned a single person who has suffered or died from this other than himself. And so it is that lack of empathy. And I think that the books that people will write about leadership. I watched Trudeau, your prime minister's statement a couple weeks ago, when you were starting to get a spike in Canada. And he just fluidly went from English back to French, back to English, back to French, and talked about how we flattened the curve once, we can do it again. We're all in this together. Look out for your neighbors, wear a mask for them, all of that. And it just made my heart sad that we don't have just the basest level of leadership in this. It turns out I'm a law and order person too. I like there to be laws that everybody follows, and I want there to be order coming from the leadership.
Right.
It is so sad. But I think it really comes down to the idea that of just law and order and strength at all costs, command and control. And it is that utter lack of showing vulnerability and showing the humanity. I mean, we just, like, you don't see that right now coming out of the leadership that we have. And I think that is, I'd love to send him a copy of your books. I mean, you know, we need more of that humanity in leadership.
I did go to school with Prime Minister Trudeau at McGill, and I may have tutored him in math. So there's that sidebar comment here. There's a really famous photo of President Obama, first year, I believe, in office, with a young black boy, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, that looks up to him and says, can I touch your hair?
You have hair like me.
Yeah. And he leans over, obviously, and it's one of the most candid and poignant shots, potentially, of his presidency. It reminds me of another very empathic and caring leader these days. In the midst of the pandemic, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand,
yes,
sort of stopped in the middle of a press conference and said, "I've got something special for the children of New Zealand." And this was about 2 weeks prior to Easter. And she says, with a smile on her face, "Listen, I have had deep conversations with the Easter Bunny. I know we're all on lockdown, but I just want you to know that we've come to an agreement that we're going to allow the Easter Bunny to show up in your homes to drop off the eggs and the chocolate. So there's a special proclamation, and here it is, for the Easter Bunny to forego, the lockdown of the pandemic." And then she adds this. She says, "Oh, and I also managed to have a meeting with the Tooth Fairy, so we've sorted that one out too." Oh. But that's the empathy and the care that I'm getting at. Even in positions of power, politics, CEOs, directors of a marketing team, you can put yourself intellectually with your head and with your heart emotionally into the shoes of other people that you serve. and you can make a difference as a leader. You really can.
So we have just a few minutes remaining. Talk to us about your new book, Lead, Care, Win.
I always have fun with titles, first of all, and I kind of try to sort of see if people might figure out my Fibonacci code. And this one is done in some reverse engineering. And so people have questioned, oh, you put the word win. I thought leaders are supposed to be whatever you're saying, caring, Dan. I'm like, well, this is actually how I see it. If you want to win the hearts and minds of your team, you must care in your leadership. So it's actually reverse. And really the book is a distillation of back to basics. It's a book about civility. It's a book about empathy. It's a book about how you remain curious for yourself and your team. It's a book about being relatable. How, as when Bianca Andreescu, the Canadian tennis player, beat Serena Williams at the Canadian Open in 2019, she beat her because Serena abandoned the match at 3-1 due to back spasms. And Bianca, when she heard the news, rushed right over, knelt down to Serena and said, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? What can I do?" And when they both went on court to receive the trophies, they both championed the other for what they've learned and how they treated one another during that ordeal. That's really, in essence, what the book is about. It's how do we lead but care for others in the moment.
I have to ask, did you find any place where gender played a role in leaders being more caring or being accepted for being more caring? Or was there, I would imagine that women might have led with that more, but I don't know if they are allowed to lead with that as much as they're capable.
I used to have this running joke through all the times I was a leader of teams and orgs and what have you, that I was, and then people said you shouldn't say this anymore. So I'm going to say it to you, but whatever.
Nobody's listening, sure.
I used to say I'm 1/3 female, 2/3 male. And then someone corrected me and said, look, you can just say feminine. You don't need to say female, right? You don't have genitalia. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Yes. And again, we go back to the pandemic and we take a look at female leaders in the Nordics, in Germany, in New Zealand, et cetera, and provincially, right? Many health officers, mine in British Columbia, mine in Canada, are female. And there's this palpable care. And this is not meant to be gender biased. It's that it seems naturally that women seem to be empathic and caring and enduring to the soul and the mind and the love of people, versus some men who think that the militaristic command and control and motivated by fear is how we lead. I think we've dispelled that notion, quite frankly, with the pandemic and the females who are leading us through many of these ordeals.
I couldn't agree more, and I would love to see more women in leadership. So thank you for your time today, Dan. Tell the fine people who are listening. We've had it scrolling below for anybody who's watching, but tell the fine people who are listening to this as a podcast where they can find you.
It's so kind of you, Laura. And again, I can't thank you enough for your wonderful invitation. It's simple: leadcarewin.com. Just take you a bit of microsite of the book, and then you'll take it from there. leadcarewin.com.
And the book came out on September 29th, so it's available everywhere fine books are sold.
Indeed, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today.
LGO, honestly,
DP.
the privilege is mine. Right back at you. Cheers.
Thank you.